All right. Hey, everybody, welcome. We're so glad that you could join us this evening. I'm sure we've got folks from all over the country and maybe beyond. My name is Jessica Gaines. I serve as the program coordinator. Ooh, hang on a second. Here we go. Sorry, I serve as the program coordinator here at Green Acre, Baha'i Center of Learning. We're in southern Maine, on the banks of the beautiful Piscataqua River. This is the ancestral homeland of the Wabanaki. And like a lot of other institutions in the country, we're closed physically right now, but we're transitioning to bring you online programming. And of course, we're happy to have Penn Badgley and Dr. Nura Mowzoon with us here tonight. And Green Acre's mission is to build community through the pursuit of truth and justice. We're a faith-based organization which is centered on the teachings of Baha'u'llah, who's the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, and on the message that the oneness of humanity is a strength that we can all unite around for the advancement of civilization. We aim to learn and collaborate and transform our society alongside you. So before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you are in our Zoom webinar, you can interact with us via the chat option. If you put your cursor down at the bottom, you should see a chat icon, and please click that, and then a page or a bar will come up on the right. And through there, you can send us any messages that you have. Hopefully they're questions about the content, and we'll work those questions in. And so you all probably know Penn Badgley is an American actor and musician. He's received wide media attention for his roles in the CW teen drama series Gossip Girl, and as Joe Goldberg in the Netflix thriller series You. Dr. Nura Mowzoon is based outside of Phoenix, Arizona. She has over 10 years of experience in helping couples and individuals develop relationship skills. And these are both amazing people, and we're very glad to have them tonight. And with that, I will turn it over to them.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Very happy to be here tonight. Really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have through technology. So, Penn, do you want to kind of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about, or?
Yeah. So, as far as I understand it, there are people who are joining in from the region around where Green Acre is situated in Elliott, Maine. And then there are people who are tuning in and who are not able to interact, maybe because they're viewing through YouTube. So this is both an introduction to the Baha'i faith and an exploration of a Baha'i perspective on tests and difficulties. What does that mean? The nature of tests and difficulties. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be being that now is a time of a worldwide test, where every individual is experiencing difficulty in a lot of different ways. We want to recognize that and using it as a moment to offer this insight, which we as Baha'is are striving to glean from this unique resource that we have of the Baha'i writings, and offering it to the world around us. That's something that we strive to do as Baha'is, because we also believe that if this really is a divinely sent message for this age, for the ills of the world now, we need all hands on deck to help understand and unpack this message. So this is we're always here transparent about our resource of inspiration. You know, we are Baha'is. The Baha'i faith is a world religion. Of course, this raises many questions, right? I think particularly for those who are joining who are possibly totally new to the term Baha'i or the name Baha'u'llah. So maybe I could even just define that name. It is Arabic for, Baha'u'llah is Arabic for the glory of God. That root word Baha, as I understand it, translates best to glory, light, and splendor. So a Baha'i is anybody who is of Baha, of glory, light, and splendor, striving to live by these principles and teachings. Hopefully after we get through the sort of most essential arc of this perspective we're going to be going through tonight, we really want to be responding to questions. I see there's a question that just came up, but maybe it's a little bit too early. But we really would like for it to be a conversation through technology that is both possible in ways never before. It's also a bit challenging, so bear with us. This is something that we are doing for the first time in this way. I'm very excited. I'm very nervous. So thank you for joining us. Just trying to. So, by the way, I'm trying to understand how do we know? Are we into the slides yet, Jess, or is that no?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And
so,
I will say that we've got several people asking if you could just explain a little bit more about what the Baha'i faith is, because they have no prior background.
Absolutely. So that's actually what we're going to do when we start. So that's how we're starting the entire thing. So why don't we just get right into that?
You want me to share the slides?
Please do.
So I'll start with a little bit of Baha'i 101. We're going to pull up a slide, and I apologize for my coughing. I have allergies. I don't have COVID. I just have allergies. So
how do you know?
Thank God.
I don't have a fever. So the Baha'i faith is the youngest independent world religion. And like Penn mentioned, it is founded on the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And the Baha'i faith is about 160 some years old. It originated in Persia, which is now modern day Iran, but it's now one of the most widespread and fastest growing religions in the world. So we're going to touch on some of the most fundamental beliefs of the Baha'i faith and sort of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about in light of how the Baha'i faith understands tests and difficulties and how it connects to what we're all going through individually and collectively right now. So one of just like there's a lot to any religion, there's a lot to the Baha'i faith, but often I like to kind of boil it down to 3 essential core principles that a lot of the other teachings spring from. So what is happening?
Sorry. I'm trying to get the YouTube channel over so I can see questions there as well.
So we might actually just have to do that a little bit like organically, Jess. I don't know that you can share the screen and do that.
No, I'm not trying to share the screen. I'm trying to get it off of the shared screen.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
So one of the core principles of the Baha'i faith is that it is a monotheistic religion that believes that God is one. So regardless of the different names the different religions have for God, whether you call God Allah, Jehovah, Yahweh, it's ultimately, Baha'u'llah taught all of these different names that we have are ultimately just referring to one single source. So one God. The next principle is the oneness of humanity. So I guess I can't scroll this. Jess, do you want to scroll a little bit? Ben, do you want to take this or?
Sure. Actually, if you could go up one more, Jess. Just up like to the, or yeah, no, I'm sorry. That's good. That's good. It's quite small, so it's hard to see.
Oh no.
Well, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, I think for those who can read along, that's great. And
there we go.
Oh, that's much better. That's
better.
Much better.
Hey.
Yeah. So I myself came to the Baha'i faith only about 5 years ago. I was never seeking religion myself. The words God and religion were so loaded and negatively so for me, that it was just never something that I was investigating. So, you know, just to keep in mind that any of us who are sharing about the Baha'i faith, there is no clergy, and no one no one can be an authoritative resource or authority, or an authoritative interpreter, right? So this is both our understanding, but then so these core principles are understood. They are true, and this is the essence of Baha'u'llah's message. So as Nura said, God is one, which means humanity is one. We have all been, you could say, created, if that sounds a bit simplistic. You know, God is the generative impulse. God is essentially unknowable. But what we do know is ourselves. What we do know is that our soul is a sign of God. What we do know is that we share our origin. You know, science has even proven this. Another essential principle of the Baha'i faith is the unity of science and religion, or the harmony of science and religion. So we understand actually that anything in reality, in physical reality, is a reflection of spiritual reality. So therefore, what science has proven to be true, that we're all essentially connected, we're made from the same substance, which is atomic, you know, and that actually we share as much as 60% DNA with trees, how much more with our fellow people. We are one, you know, so that is a spiritual reality that has always been true. There's this quote here, the principle of the oneness of mankind implies an organic change in the structure of present-day society, a change such as the world has not yet experienced. So I think the question then becomes, what does this mean for religion? We're talking about a oneness that will reshape the world as we know it. So what does that mean for the role of religion and our understanding of it? So Jess, if you could go to the next. So this is a quote that we found that we thought starts to get at this evolutionary concept of religion. And at a time now where, you know, we're thinking about hardship, that actually there's an essential joy that we might never lose. With faces beaming with joy, hasten ye unto him. This is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future, that him that seeketh attaineth. That is Baha'u'llah. What he is speaking to is this idea of progressive revelation, where all of the world faiths as we understand them have originated from one source over the period of history that we know, kind of as though the sun rises at different points on the horizon. Another analogy you could think of is they're all different chapters in the same book, you know. And if you actually look at the place and time each one originated, they're not simultaneous, you know, and that each religion has arisen responding to the needs of the time, and in accordance with the capacity of the people at that time to perceive the reality of nature and God and themselves. So that is why, you know, if we look at religions that are thousands of years old and we struggle with some of the language or we struggle with some of the laws, well, we can understand that it was appropriate then. And that this vision of all of the religions being connected and eternal in their essential truths, you know, it does not mean that the Baha'i faith seeks to be the only one, but that it is, you know, this fulfillment, it brings the essential truths of all religions to a vivid reality. So, you know, and this is also like, it's a lot to bring into reality, which we're striving to understand ourselves, you know. So so again, this is much of what I'm saying is my working understanding. And I don't know if you want to add anything, Nura.
Yeah, I want to just, I often refer to myself as a very meat and potatoes kind of person. And so I want to offer another way of, not another, but, well, yeah, another way of looking at it. Baha'u'llah fundamentally taught, and Penn already mentioned this, he taught that all of the world's great religions have been sent by God, but just at different times to meet the needs of humanity. So one of the ways that a lot of times Baha'is offer, one of the analogies that Baha'is often offer for this is that of going through school. When a child goes from 4th grade to 5th grade, the 5th grade teacher doesn't tell the students, forget everything you learned up until now, all you need is 5th grade, and don't worry about 6th or 7th grade or anything after that. No, the teacher actually builds on what the child has been taught. They refresh what the child has been taught, then they build because the child is ready for more, and then they gently prepare the child for the next grade. But then when you look at the knowledge that the teachers have, the teachers essentially have the same knowledge, but what they bring to the student is based on the capacity of the students. Mm-hmm. And so for humanity, Baha'u'llah taught that the guidance that God gives us is based on our capacity for where we are at. And so that we are ultimately at a place now where the social teachings that Baha'u'llah brought and the principles that he brought through the Baha'i faith, Baha'is believe are the same principles that are needed to really cure an ailing world. So I wanted to offer that along with what Penn said, in case it would be helpful.
And we can clarify that Baha'u'llah claims to be the messenger of God in this day. He is the universal manifestation for this age. And that his message contains, as all the messengers before him, what is needed for the world to advance towards its ultimate goal, which is the unity of the human race on Earth and its peace and well-being and tranquility. And it's a peace that is positively existing, much in the way that Martin Luther King Jr. expressed. You know, it is not just the absence of war, but a positively existing thing. And so that's what we're trying to understand. What does that mean? You know, so we engage in community building activities around the world, trying to put these writings into action, because ultimately, if all of this remains a theory, then it is worth nothing, you know? And so that is the essential practice of a Baha'i, and as we understand it, any good person, right? Like most people, like we're striving for the betterment of the world. So how do tests and difficulties fit into this? Whether it's something that is global and in many cases tragic, or whether it's very personal, you know. And I think what we're going to do right now, Dr. Nura's relation, your expertise in relationship counseling, it's kind of like this. It's this link between the individual and society, where, you know, probably that which we're struggling with at the individual level, like in our relationships, is kind of also what the world is struggling with, you know, in it's like between nations. So in order to, part of our thinking in presenting tonight is continuing to look at like this framework for looking at the world of a high perspective, so that we can have the context, the proper context for tests and difficulties. So what we're going to do is we'll try, we won't, hopefully maybe not spend so much time on this, but we're just going to kind of like outline these major questions, which I think frame and shape, deeply influence everybody's thinking. And these questions are: what is the purpose of life? What is the true nature of the human being? These questions we often, I think, relegate to the sort of individualistic sort of everyone's free to have their own assumptions, their own answers to these questions. And I agree with that. I mean, of course, everybody's free to have their own answers. I wonder if part of what the world is struggling to come to terms with, though, is the sort of infinite diversity of answers to these questions, and how much that prevents us from unifying around any given cause or principle. You know, we all want peace, but how do we achieve it? You know, what do we identify as the meaning and purpose of life, and what do we believe the human being is really capable of? You know, do we define the human being ultimately as a chemical animal, hardly capable of rising above its own sort of like basest instincts, or do we believe that the human being is inherently noble and dignified and ultimately created by a source that is in some manner conscious and unknowable and bountiful, favorful, merciful, creative. So
really simple stuff.
Yeah, really basics. That, I mean, you know, Nura's meat and potatoes. I guess, what does that make me? Like kale and orange juice? What am I?
You're like souffle. I don't know.
Souffle.
I don't. It's like
Wow.
these are complicated. Like they're.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I don't. I mean, a true genius makes complicated things simple. So you please take the reins as much as you're able. Can we go to the next slide?
Yes.
Also, Jess, if you see questions roll in that are specifically applicable to what we're talking about, you know, call a timeout and ask the question at any point.
Yeah, I am seeing questions on YouTube as well, which I didn't know I was going to be able to do. So that's helpful.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you feel would be useful for us to address before we move forward?
Someone says, there is no one purpose to life. Everyone has their own specific purpose. I guess the universal purpose of life is finding one's individual purpose and using the gifts that you have been given.
Yeah, I would say that's spot on, and that's kind of what we're trying to get at, you know. So forgive the stumblings of my own mind, right? So I think that's a really great point. Maybe Nura, do you want to read from this next slide?
Sure. So speaking of the purpose of life, a pivotal concept, one of the main concepts in the Baha'i teachings, is that the refinement of one's inner character and service to humanity are inseparable facets of life. So the bullet points, I should point out, the bullet points are our thoughts, right, Penn? And then the what's in quotations are from the Baha'i writings. So just to be clear.
Yes, right.
Right. So for those of you who are following along with us, just what you see as bullet points are our own thoughts, but then what you see in quotes, you can say is like authoritative Baha'i perspective. So the Baha'i writings say, we cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us, and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself also deeply affected by it. The one acts upon the other, and every abiding change in the life of man is the result of these mutual reactions. So essentially, Baha'is believe that there's a twofold purpose that is associated, or that is the intention of our lives, that is fundamental to our lives. One is to attend to our own spiritual and intellectual growth, and the other is to contribute to the continuous progress and transformation of society. No big deal, again. Really simple.
I think is what McKenna was, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Lady was getting at. I just didn't want to say her name, anonymity. Anyway, I think that's kind of what she was getting at. That like it's our job to find out what are our unique gifts and then offer them in service to humanity so that society can evolve.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we kept the quotes in here, right? Penn, the ones about our gems.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's on the next slide.
Yeah. Was there anything that you wanted to add to this slide?
Well, no, just to underscore what Jess shared and that question that came from a listener and everything you said. And yeah, that like there's a necessary and endless sort of diversity to the expression of this essential purpose, which is one, you know, and yet it has multiple dimensions, right? Like we're striving to to do the same things, but to many different effects, you know, and we all have something different to offer. And of course, I think the essential relationship is like that the individual in trying to sort of find themselves and develop their own talents, their own contributions to the world, that it is through service to others, you know, and that's you know, how we find it. That's like an engine to our personal search.
And I think that this is one area where the Baha'i faith has something a little bit unique to offer, is that it is service that also helps the individual grow. It's not just the individual's job. I'm gonna work on myself so I can contribute to humanity. It's also contributing to humanity helps you work on yourself. They're mutually linked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much.
There was actually a quote, I don't think we ended up putting it in our presentation, but there is a quote in the Baha'i writings that talks about how actually the more that we search for ourselves, the less likely we are to find ourselves. But the more we serve humanity and search for God, the better acquainted we become with ourselves, and that this is actually one of the greatest spiritual laws of life. As Penn and I were putting this fireside together, there were so many quotes that were like, and then this, and then this. And so some made the cut, some didn't. But I think it's a really important thing for us to reflect on, is this idea that actually we become better acquainted with ourselves through being outward focused and and having the intention of serving humanity and searching for God. So there it is.
There's the purpose of life, if anybody was wondering.
We go.
At some point, you know, we're getting several questions, people asking to hear a little bit more about both of you, your journey to becoming a Baha'i, and what was it like, and what were the challenges for you? Now might not be the right time, but just keep that in mind. If you want.
Well, maybe actually, I think that really relates to the next slide. It's like where this question of what is the true nature of the human being? You know, what is my true nature? What is anyone really thinking about that? You know, so Jess, if you could go to the next slide, please.
I also see some comments coming in asking for us to share quotes. Jess, is this going to be available somewhere, or like
the video?
It's being recorded.
Yes, this is being recorded, and it will be shared later.
But as we pull quotes just from memory, I'm wondering how we can offer them to people who are asking for them as we talk about this. So maybe those of you who are watching, right.
She said, I mean, the quote you didn't have in
the slide.
In the slide, yeah.
So maybe if there's quotes that we work in, that we weave into the conversation that aren't on the slides, maybe Jess, can you just like make a note of it, and then I'll send you a document or something, and then you can send it out to people if that helps.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to address that. You're welcome. You're welcome, Cheshmak.
So maybe you know, I'll share just the littlest bit of as a person who found the Baha'i faith, you know, in my 20s, and I kind of realized that I am a Baha'i, I think when I was 28, you know, so just about 5 years ago. I was asking these questions. I mean, I think like we all do, you know, and there are probably different chapters in life where everybody's like seeking to answer these questions more ardently. You know, when you're a teenager, and then maybe in your early 20s, you ease off a little bit, you got to find a job and go to school. And then maybe in your mid 20s, you go through a really heart-wrenching breakup, and you're just wondering, what is the answer? What are the, yeah. Because I think the thing is like, if this doesn't have effect on our personal relationships, if this doesn't make me like a better husband or father, if it doesn't make me a better actor, or, you know, if it doesn't like have a very practical effect in our lives, I mean, what good or any of these philosophies or religions or whatever it might be, you know? I actually happened to find the Baha'i faith when I was staying with an indigenous tribe by the name of the Kogi tribe, which is the largest pre-Columbian intact civilization in South America. I met a Baha'i there, and we just stayed in touch, always talking about matters about how social justice relates to like personal spirituality, you know? And over the years, he would simply share, I mean, you know, there's a lot else there, but basically like over the years, he would share these gems. And I was just like, what are you talking about, man? Like, what is that? And somewhere along the way, you know, he just shared more and more with me. And then I spent about probably a year once I was consciously aware this is a body of writings, you know? I mean, so if maybe I'll just take a moment. Baha'u'llah was born in 1817 in Tehran. Born? Iran. Is that right? Yeah, Iran. Yeah, not in Tehran. It was actually in Nura.
Focus.
So, right. So, and he died in 1892 and spent most of his life in prison or exile or some form of it. This message, which challenged the religious authorities at the time and governmental authorities at the time, had such a resounding effect on the world around him that he was made a prisoner. And it is essentially from prison and exile that all of these messages were communicated. In fact, in 1863, he communicated from his cell. Actually, I shouldn't say that. He was, at this point, he was in Adrianople and Constantinople. But he communicated this message to the leaders of the world to put down their arms and unite in peace. And that in fact, if you don't, for this is the will of God, you know, there are so many consequences, and they all came to pass and are still coming to pass. And we find ourselves in an age that is both, it's like Half-Life, you know, it's this incredible, if you look at the last 200 years or so, this incredible explosion and efflorescence of technology, of knowledge and understanding, of sciences and arts. I mean, look at the world, you know. At the same time, we find ourselves struggling with, I think, this sort of curious ambiguity to a lot of these questions of life. And can we make it? Can we make it through this time? You know, now is a time where we're really asking that question. I think most people probably carry this faith that we can and this hope that we can, but we're challenged to understand how on earth, as our systems right now are challenged beyond their capacity to serve and administer us. Like, what are we going to do, right? So these are the questions that I think humanity's been asking itself since Baha'u'llah came, and that's why he came, and that's why he's here, and that's what this message is for.
How did this connect to your search and how you found the faith?
How doesn't it? I'm not understanding the question. Because again, I think like I was trying to seek out what my role in all of this was. So I was on Gossip Girl, right? And this question of social responsibility was very heavy on my mind. It's just, and it still is, you know. What is it? What are the implications? If you benefit from a system that you know is unjust and doesn't support people equally, what can you realistically do about that? You know, if you're really I mean, you want to talk about the pyramid of privilege. I mean, a person in my position is essentially at the top. I mean, you know, there are many, many more. There is actually, tragically, there is like a lot of wealth and privilege beyond mine, exceedingly. But those people, you know, it's a smaller and smaller number, and it's really important. Well, it's pretty evident we can't go on as we've been, right? So yeah, I was asking that question. It was actually prompted by the BP oil spill, and I think the end of 2010 was that, spring of 2010, something along those lines. I just thought, man, I mean, what are we gonna do? When are we gonna start living more responsibly? You know, so I just had personal search in response to these questions.
As far, I don't know if people really care about my journey. I feel like most of the questions are for Penn, but
no. On YouTube, they're saying Dr. Nura and Penn.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Well,
You were included in the circle.
I think especially Nura, it's because you grew up with it. I think it's also like how it connects to your work, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe share a bit about those too.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Baha'i faith, but one of the biggest, sorry, saw a little shout out from a friend. Okay, so I grew up in the Baha'i faith, or learning about the Baha'i faith, but one of the biggest, or one of the main principles of the Baha'i faith is independent investigation of the truth. So one of the really cool things, I think, is every single Baha'i that you meet over the age of 15, which is the point at which a youth can choose to identify as a Baha'i or take their time or continue their search. But basically, any Baha'i that you meet is a Baha'i because they chose it, not because they were just born into it. It has to be a conscious decision that is made. So I grew up with the Baha'i teachings being taught to me. On my mother's side, we went back a few generations, and on my father's side, he actually grew up as Mormon, or Latter-day Saint, as they are referring to themselves now. And he became a Baha'i later on in life, and I was raised with the Baha'i teachings. So I never really had the moment that I'm so jealous of with people like you, Penn, who find the faith later on in life. I never had the moment of like discovery. It was something that was like a very natural identification for me. But I did actually, going back to what you said, going through breakups and hard times when you're younger, I did actually find a time, like I went through a time in my life where the tests were so strong and so difficult that I was really brought to my knees, and I really actually got the fact that all I had was God, and that it was really just about me and God and my spirituality and my faith. And the only thing that would bring me comfort was actually prayer and meditation and trust. It got to the point where I just had to trust, and I just had to let go and trust and believe. And so my relationship with the faith really blossomed through putting everything that I had learned into my, everything that I had been taught my whole life was actually put into practice because I had been brought to my knees through these tests. I don't know if that's making sense, but that's when I owned it, was when it was really about me and God, and then it became something that I owned rather than something that was beautiful, but I didn't realize I hadn't had the personal connection with it that I could have, and I'm still discovering that. So, and growing up in a fit, because you wanted me to kind of connect it to my profession. I grew up in a family where my parents came from very different cultural backgrounds. they're probably watching this right now being like, why is she talking about us? But they grew up with very different cultural backgrounds, and watching them navigate how these backgrounds affected their understanding and their dynamics and their communication, I became really passionate about human connection and about communication and understanding one another, and the idea of unity, really, because I watched my parents work so hard to discover what it means to be unified and to implement it in our family. And so it became a very personal thing for me as well. And so it became what I do, helping couples find unity. So should we go on to the next?
Yeah. No, I think we've covered it. I think it's good. Bye. No, I just want to underscore that actually, yeah, I mean, for everything I said, the personal truth is that, like, I also came during a time of such intense personal tests. Like, I was brought to my knees. And there's a famous and infamous Rumi quote. Sorry, what?
I said I was brought to my knees harder than you were, Penn, okay? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I'm trying to make a universal point. This is not a competition. We can take that offline. Nora.
I was brought to my knees too.
No, I mean, what I was trying to do was underscore that it was a beautiful point and how it relates to our topic. And Rumi made the point very well, that something along the lines of God enters through the wound.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
And, I mean, I think for people who really struggle with the term God and who call themselves atheists, or, all the different ways we can identify, I think still there's an essential truth there that we understand. God enters through the wound. What enters through our wounds, it's often truth and light, but it hurts. So we're just going to spend a little bit more time on just like our nature, and then
more questions,
and then we're done. So maybe it's helpful to just outline, like, people probably have these questions as we are exploring these principles. What do Baha'is believe about this? What does Baha'u'llah say about that? So the most essential human identity that we have is that of our soul. It is a rational and immortal soul, which is, as Baha'u'llah says, quote, entirely out of the order of the physical creation. So it's apart from time and space. Baha'u'llah actually uses the metaphor of the sun to explain the relationship between the soul and the body. He says, quote, the soul of man is the sun by which his body is illumined, and from which it draweth its sustenance. Another analogy we often use is the relationship between the soul and the body is like a light and a mirror. If you see the mirror reflects the light, but it would not be entirely appropriate to say the light is in the mirror, however much it appears to be, but that there is a very special association and a relationship between the body and the soul. This quote here, I think, also gets at the mysticism that everybody's able to experience. Man is said to be the greatest sign of God. That is, he is the book of creation. For all the mysteries of the universe are found in him. That quote is from Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah. There are a couple questions I'm seeing coming up. Do you want to maybe
Are they relevant to what we're talking about, or should we?
I can't tell because I'm a Luddite and I don't know how to see them. I just see them pop up and then go away.
Oh no.
Hang
well,
on.
I think this is kind of filtering them, yeah?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, all right.
We'll just trust that you'll bring them up as they fit.
This question, I'll put it to you and you guys can decide. I personally have found that as I've experienced tests, it's brought me closer and deeper to my faith, as you say. but for some people, tests push them away from faith. If you have any thoughts and reflections on this, I'd appreciate it. And they want to share it with someone dear to them.
Yeah, well, let's just carry on then, because that's definitely what we're getting to. Thank you
Right.
for that question. Let's go to the next slide and see what we have prepared for ourselves. So this middle quote, Nura, I'm thinking is kind of, it gets at that question. That tests, I don't know. I mean, it's like tests can have this different effect on us. So, and maybe the question is like, why is that? How is it that tests can drive someone closer to God or closer to an understanding of their own selves? Which, by the way, in the Baha'i faith, we equate knowledge of yourself with knowledge of God, because essentially God is essentially unknowable, you know, and we only know God in sort of the way that it reflects in us and in other people, you know. And in these manifestations of God, like Baha'u'llah, like Jesus, like Muhammad, like Moses, Noah, Buddha, Krishna, etc. So, Nura, maybe you can read that middle quote here, looking at the self and maybe the different reactions we can have to tests.
Self really has two meanings, or is used in two senses in the Baha'i writings. One is self, the identity of the individual created by God. This is the self mentioned in such passages as "He hath known God who hath known himself," etc. The other self is the ego, the dark animalistic heritage each one of us has, the lower nature that can develop into a monster of selfishness, brutality, lust, and so on. It is this self we must struggle against, or this side of our natures, in order to strengthen and free the spirit within us and help it to attain perfection. I think in connecting this with the question that was just brought up, the way that I think of tests either bringing us closer to God or further, for me, in my meat and potatoes thinking, I think it really boils down to how we decide that we're going to view it and handle it and relate to it. And a lot of it comes down to, for me, to faith and to trust. So when I'm going through something profoundly difficult, if my foundation is trust and belief that God loves me and would never test me beyond my capacity and is only wanting me to grow and better myself so that I can be of service to the world, if I actually believe that, and if that is the truth, then growing closer towards God in this process is the only direction that I can go, because my belief is such that this is happening because he loves me in the first place. If I don't have that faith or that certitude, and I don't have that trust guiding me, then I think it's a lot easier to just throw in the towel and be like, well, this isn't fair. I don't want it. And if I was loved, this would not be happening. So for me, the foundation of that question is, if the faith is there that God loves you, then the only direction you can grow in is closer to him. And if that relationship still needs nurturing, then I think it's easier to turn away and lose heart. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. This is an extreme oversimplification, but have you guys ever heard this idea that you can decide to believe that life is either happening to you or for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it really does relate to, Nura knows a lot about this, like in her work. I think the difference between agency and codependency in a relationship, like how we define the purpose of struggle. If we think things are happening to us and that all of these people are our adversaries, as opposed to, that we have a role in our perception, and that we really can change our ability to respond to hardship through our perception, through the way that we see it. So again, that's why we're spending so much time, and forgive us if it's a bit belabored, it's probably my fault, on just the lens through which we see it, it being tests and difficulties. So maybe if we go to the next slide, we can carry on, because now we're getting to the nature of tests and difficulties.
Your turn to read.
Sure, I can read. Tests are a means by which a soul is measured as to its fitness and proven out by its own acts. God knows its fitness beforehand, and also its unpreparedness. But man with an ego would not believe himself unfit unless proof were given to him. Consequently, his susceptibility to evil is proven to him when he falls into the tests, and the tests are continued until the soul realizes its own unfitness. Then remorse and regret tend to root out the weakness. The same test comes again in greater degree until it is shown that a former weakness has become a strength, and the power to overcome evil has been established. So there's a lot here, and we can spend some time on it. First, I want to say that our intention tonight has been, well, it's never been like to just give a sort of spiritual sheen to that which is obviously difficult. It's like just this way of positive thinking, or to try and see the silver lining to a dark cloud. It's a very different approach to seeing the value of tests and difficulties. We don't want to try and act as though sorrow is not sorrow. We don't want to pretend that pain is not pain. Tests are tests because they are so taxing. And often, though we are being tested within our capacity, it feels like we are being tested just to within an inch of our capacity. And it feels like it's beyond. Whether it is something huge, global, like we're enduring now, or something that is very personal and intimate. And I also want to clarify that there are two kinds of tests: that which are essentially a term I would not normally use myself, but heaven sent, something that is, you could say, divine, sent from God, and thus maybe unavoidable. And then there are those which are a result of our own negligence, a result of our ego, which we actually could avoid. And I want to also spend a little bit of time, like, I think the danger sometimes of a somewhat like superstitious spiritual perspective might be to say something like believing that this coronavirus, COVID-19, is a heaven-sent trial. There's a lot of that kind of language out there, and maybe that's true, but I wouldn't make that assumption based simply on the fact that we're taking a spiritual perspective, because I think keeping in mind that the reality of science is also essential here, that science and religion go hand in hand as we explore the world. There's a lot of data that shows that this was avoidable, or that at least the degree to which it has swept the world could have been avoidable if we were a more united people, So I don't want anyone to walk away with this sort of, like dangerous, or that we're like offering this sort of superficial notion of like, this is, if you just hunker down and pray, like it's all going to be okay. And it's a good thing. Like, no, it's not that clear cut. And I think in a lot of cases, it's probably dangerous to try and identify a test that is heaven sent You know what I mean? It's just appreciating that ultimately we can learn from any test. And the tests are unavoidable. And the difficulties are essentially the main, the means by which we learn and perfect our souls, you know, and not that we become perfect ever, that's impossible, but that we can perfect as a verb, you know.
So someone is wondering if you all think that, says, do you think that the world as we know it with this pandemic on us is more ready to be open to such a point of view or religion?
I think if we wouldn't be doing what we're doing if we didn't think so. And, you know, I smile and laugh at the same time. It seems to me that we are awakening to the reality that we are one, even during a struggle, which is interesting. Like, I don't think in anybody's lifetime an event like this has occurred, anybody's lifetime who's, you know, with us now, where we know every person on earth is grappling with this event. Also, in the wake of this unprecedented impact, it's my understanding that there are a couple major powers of the world, France, US, Russia. I'm not sure about the others. Obviously, seek out some reliable resources there, some news if you can find that. They're entering into a temporary treaty. Isn't this right? A peace treaty?
That's a proposed truce to cease.
It's a proposed truce, which some of the major powers of the world are considering entering into right now as a result of this time. I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Pretty basic, but it's significant that, like, you know, that's happening. It would have been great if it didn't take this kind of thing to initiate that sort of, to initiate a truce. So I think if the question was, do we think people are more open to a message like this one? I mean, I think the evidence is there, yeah.
I think that one of the things that's coming to the surface, as you mentioned, Penn, you know, because of COVID-19, is how interconnected we are, and how something happening across the world directly impacts us. So I think it's actually unavoidable for us to recognize and acknowledge our interconnection. So I think our hope as Baha'is is not, just to be clear, in case this is like in somebody's mind and they're curious about it, Baha'is are not like on a mission to be like, hey, everyone, now you have to accept the Baha'i faith because now it's time for you all to turn to the Baha'i faith and become a Baha'i, whatever. But what Baha'is are striving for is to get everyone in the world to actually work towards implementing these principles of unity and oneness, regardless of the labels that we have and the religious identification that we may or may not have. So is the world ready to embrace the Baha'i faith? Like, if that was the crux of that question, I think all of us could agree that we don't know, and that's not actually the issue for us. The issue for us is implementing the principles that are needed to heal humanity. Mm-hmm. So that is the mission, and that is the hope. And I think now more than ever, we're realizing our oneness and our connectedness. And this quote, actually, that you just read, Penn, I feel it not only applies to us as individuals, but it also applies to us as a world. that this pandemic that we're going through is showing us our unpreparedness. It's showing us our unfitness. And it is, again, bringing us to our knees to realize, you know, we're not as invincible as we think we are. And our collective ego has made us think that we really were, we really had it together more than we really actually did. Is that making sense?
Yeah. There's a hit a nerve here. Apparently, there's a ton of questions pouring in. Some of them are pretty interesting. Someone said, how can we see COVID as unifying instead of disunifying, especially at the person-to-person level?
That's an interesting question, because it's like we can't be physically close. And yet, look at what's happening right now. Well, I think one thing that's been happening with COVID-19 is the ways in which we are disunified they're like gaping vulnerabilities, you know? But then the ways that we are unified is how we're all keeping it together. And I feel like, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, and also how we're connecting with each other.
Yeah.
This is again, we should be clear, and you mentioned this, Penn, but I do want to be clear that Baha'i, like, we're not sitting here saying, it's great, like, COVID's been the best thing that's happened to, like, it's definitely not great. It's definitely awful. But I think and there's actually a lot of studies out there and social studies that have found that people actually in times like this are turning towards one another more than they are turning away from each other. Mm-hmm. And there's more of a collective connectivity and vulnerability more than there was before this happened. A, because it's necessary, it's critical for our survival, and B, because again, humanity is being brought to its knees. Mm-hmm. and we're realizing the need for connection because it's been taken away from us in a physical way. Mm-hmm. And so it having been taken away from us, this need for physical distancing, I think has fueled this need for emotional connection because of the isolation that so many of us feel. Mm-hmm. And so this emotional connection that people are hungry for, I think this is the first time that we're ready to own that and to face that. It's the first time I've seen it probably ever in my lifetime. I mean, even just walking outside, people are greeting each other more and smiling. There's this like understood heaviness in the air, but we're still like smiling despite it all. And neighbors that I've never met are offering to sew masks for one another, or putting chalk out on the sidewalks for us to write like inspiring messages to one another. Or Penn, you were talking about how people are singing from the windows in New York City in unison. You know, they're like, these are things that never would have happened 3 months ago. You know, and I think the proof is there in front of our face for us to see. But again, we choose if it's going to unite us or not. We choose how we face this.
Yeah, and again, it's like thinking of the nature of tests and difficulties. It's like we're striving to understand the value, but also completely recognizing the trauma. I mean, I was listening to an oncologist on a podcast. An oncologist is someone who, like, deals with cancer. You know, it's like a very technical term. Somebody who deals with cancer. Somebody, you know, a doctor who's like, that's their specialty. Nura, what?
It's a cancer doctor.
Yeah, cancer doctor. Even more technical. She was sharing her experience. It was very interesting, and said something that I thought was really sobering, that maybe the most tragic thing about this disease is the way people die, or virus is the way people die, which is alone. You know, they can't be in contact with their family. They can't be at their bedside. You know, hospital staffs are basically at a 100% infection rate. Like, they're all making huge sacrifices every day. All of our essential workers are putting their lives on the line. Grocery stores, shipping services. You know, I think what a lot of people are experiencing is like, what can I do?
Mm-hmm.
How do I help them? Because we know that they're out there. We know that there's a very small percentage of people right now who are on the front lines. And it seems to me that a lot of people are thinking about what they can do to help them. And then how are we going to feel once we're like allowed to gather again and go outside? You know, I think I have a child on the way, due in July. We're going to be giving birth in an entirely different place than we had anticipated. I was going to be in the West Coast shooting the 3rd season of this TV show I'm on. None of that's happening yet. You know, the spirit of faith is not to see into the future, but to trust that the human being has the capacity to arise and learn, because that actually is the nature of life for the human being, you know.
We've got several people like talking about how they're just concerned that we're just going to go back to the way things were. We're going to be grateful for a while for our connections. We're going to feel united, and then things are just going to go straight back to how they used to be.
Well, tell that to the economy. Because I mean, listen, you know, of course there are those of us, many of us, you know, yeah, are plenty of people going to try and go back to the, absolutely. I don't think that I mean, look, my personal opinion is that our systems are not going to be able to recover so quickly or easily, so that we won't be allowed the freedom to do that. But people will try, and I think, but you know, I think, you know, again, there's an essential principle to the Baha'i faith that I find very galvanizing, and that is that no one, you know, no one is born evil, and that evil is actually not a positively existing power in the world. What it is more like actual darkness, which is only the absence of light. You can't say darkness is a positively existing thing. If you turn on a light, it simply vanishes. However, the effects of darkness are staggering if you don't shine a light into it, you know? So people, while the forces of darkness are evident in us at times, quite terrifyingly sometimes, you know, and often in our world leaders, the human being is inherently noble. The human being is a symbol of God. The human being has all of these divine attributes, the infinite realm of divine attributes, potential in each of us. So we will always be threatened, I think, with our lower nature. That is kind of the point and purpose of being here now. It's like, we can't rid ourselves of our animal nature, of our lower nature, of our ego. It'll be with us until we die. But that we can and will ultimately rise above it, you know. Who, I think the question is who will do that, you know. And I think that's part of why we're asking these questions ourselves, thinking about the nature of these tests and how, you know, if those of us who are asking that question are really wanting to be able to rise, you know, but how do we do that? Maybe we could go to the next slide. And by the way, please add anything to that, but I think the next slide also helps us with that.
And maybe at some point you guys can talk about what the Baha'i community is doing collectively, and for not just Baha'is, but people who are involved in what we call, the Baha'is call the Institute process, for collectively addressing these issues. Because a lot of people are sending in questions, like basically saying, like, what can we do? You know, rather than just me as an individual, you know, helping out, but collectively, how is this really going to change? You know, so
yeah. Well, this is kind of going backwards a little bit. But there's a great quote at the bottom. I mean, maybe we could just go back to it later.
I mean, sure. Or we could just, I think it's like a standalone, given everything we've talked about, it makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe we'll just like reiterate. Nura, do you want to read some of the card?
O Son of Man, if adversity befall thee not in my path, how canst thou walk in the ways of them that are content with my pleasure? If trials afflict thee not in thy longing to meet me, how wilt thou attain the light in thy love for my beauty? Baha'u'llah.
That's a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is getting at I mean, it's kind of tough to talk about this stuff with enough nuance sometimes, because never do we want to suggest that, for instance, the way that tests and calamities come in the form of like the oppression of entire peoples, that is not the kind of thing that we should accept. That is not the kind of thing that we should suggest, oh, that's, you know, heaven sent and it's a way to learn. That is the result of human ignorance and prejudice, which is not heaven sent. That is not of God. That is never intended. However, if it's the way that our lower nature attempts to control, then we have to understand that about ourselves and our lower nature so that we can rise above it. You know, and even as I say that, I understand I do not want to oversimplify and generalize in the case of, you know, the kind of tests that have befallen entire oppressed minorities, like in America alone, let alone the history of the world. But this quote by Baha'u'llah is so deep because it cuts through all of that and gets at the heart and soul of every individual and their relationship to their creator.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like it's saying tests are our chance to be happy even when we don't get what we want. You know, is your happiness dependent upon getting what you want, or is it eternal and not affected by what happens?
And also, are you aligned with God's will,
right?
Or is it about your own?
Right.
Which I think is what you're essentially saying to us is, if you don't go through tough times, how can you actually know how will you be aligned with my will?
Right.
So,
yeah.
Because that's essentially what it is. Tests and difficulties are essentially just us really having to let go of what we thought we knew, what we thought was best for us, where we thought we were headed. Like, that's really the core, the root of any test that I can think of right now. And I'm just kind of having a mini epiphany, so bear with me.
Nice.
But the core of every single test is letting go.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of being put in check that maybe we didn't know everything we thought we knew.
Mm-hmm.
And well, how else are we going to be aligned with God's will? Maybe we can go on to the next slide, especially because
we must recognize that under duress, great things are born. Diamonds form in molten rock. The sweetest flowers of a man's spirit have often been watered by tears. To struggle gives strength. To endure breeds a greater capacity for endurance. We must not run away from our heartbreaks in life. We must go through them, however fiery they may be, and bring with us out of the fire a stronger character, a deeper reliance on ourselves and on the Creator. That is Ruhiya Khanum, a great heroine of the Baha'i faith, whose stature is, more or less unparalleled. And she passed only very recently in her old age. So, it's still such a young faith, which is quite exciting and interesting.
Someone said, letting go. Maybe that's the key, to let go and accept what is happening and accept others' opinions despite the differences with our own.
Which is a lot harder than it sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, I think it keeps coming back to this idea of being brought to our knees. Like what is present when you're brought to your knees? You're essentially being humbled. And being humbled is what it takes a lot of humility to let go and to accept. Right.
And then, and I'm also thinking of this terminology of letting go. I feel like it's letting go personally, but holding on collectively. Mm-hmm. It's like letting go for yourself, like all of the personal tests you endure. Mm-hmm. It is about this essential humility that lets us be submissive, which is a tough word but only when we're saying personally, it's like submit to nothing less than the will of God, so that actually we're sort of fighting for other people, not so much for ourselves, but we are struggling in this positive struggle, engaging in the betterment of the world for the sake of others as well. It's like it's this essential relationship between the individual and society. It's this strange dynamic where it seems like, I'm thinking of the relationship between the words humble and humiliating. They're not the same thing. They share an origin, but there's a difference. And that one is desirable, the other is not. It's a tough standard, to have the humility to, as we say, let go. But then to hold on for everyone else's sake. And we're not saying let go of the wheel. We're not saying let go of your desire to contribute to society. It's letting go of your personal desires that come from the ego, which is most of them. I think most of our desires, they're coming from a place of that nature,
I want to offer this for us to think about, because I think detachment and letting go isn't about not wanting. It's not about having no desire. Because if you had no desire, if you had no want, then it wouldn't be detachment. It's not a thing. It's only detachment can only exist when desire is present, when hope is actually present. So I think for me, it's about hope coupled with trust. To me, that's the formula, or that's what equals detachment. Because if you don't want something in the first place, you're not detached, you're indifferent. And that's not the same thing. Indifference and detachment are very, very different things. So allowing ourselves to hope and to want, it's not about nothingness, but it's about knowing that God's will is the compass, and God's will overrides anything at any point. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, and it's not right. It's not necessarily hope that we'll get what we want. It's hope that the will, like we know that the will of God will be done no matter what. And that might not be what we want, but it's still apparently what's best. It's such a hard thing to...
So for me, it's not about like absence of wanting.
Right.
But it's about wanting and trusting.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I have a friend who says, I'm either going to get what I want or something even better. But she knows that that better thing, again, may not be what the thing that she wants, but because it's God, it is better for her.
Yeah.
And even if it's what you want, you know, it really might not serve you at all in the way that you hope.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe we can go on to the next slide as well. It's just another dimension to...
Also, this is interesting. Someone says, so when a person shuts their eyes to the material world and opens their eyes to the spiritual realm, they see the great impact in tests and difficulties, which leads to growth. And they see good in bad situations. Here in Nuuk, Greenland, we are now finally reaching out to our neighbors, calling friends from the coast, and having online meetings. Do you have other suggestions for spiritual growth and how to become more united? Which we don't have to answer right now, but I thought it was worth putting it out there.
It is a great question. Let's keep it in mind and just go through the little bit we have left just to share these quotes, these gems. And then we can keep that question in mind and take a few others, you know, bearing in mind the time, I guess.
It's only 6:30 over here, so it's a lot later for you guys.
Well, I meant more like the duration, because everybody's an hour and a half in right now, and I see it's so surreal doing this with like no sense of who's out there. It's that in and of itself is a leap of faith. So thank you everybody for joining and, you know, tolerating our I'll just speak for myself, for my feeble understanding and stumbling along the way.
People are saying, keep going, you're doing great, keep going.
Yeah, those are like the two Baha'is watching, right? Yeah.
No, actually, it's not a Baha'i.
All right, should I read the next one?
Go ahead.
Okay. Physical pain is a necessary accompaniment of all human existence, and as such is unavoidable. As long as there will be life on earth, there will also be suffering in various forms and degrees. But suffering, although an inescapable reality, can nevertheless be utilized as a means for the attainment of happiness. This is the interpretation given to it by all the prophets and saints who, in the midst of severe tests and trials, felt happy and joyous and experienced what is best and holiest in life. Suffering is both a reminder and a guide. God's wisdom is indeed inscrutable to us all, and it is no use pushing too far to discover that which shall always remain a mystery to our mind. I mean, the fact it says suffering can be utilized as a means for the attainment of happiness. So suffering can catapult us into happiness.
I mean, I have to be honest, like to some degree that has been my experience. Like, you know, maybe if reflection that's coming to me now is like, you know, if we have an eye towards spirituality and we see the errant ways of our materialistic society, you know, you could experience something like I have, say, like, you know, being on not one but two iconic television shows and actually, you know, not for lack of gratitude to not appreciate it, but to understand that this is not the purpose of life. This sort of success and achievement is not at all the purpose of life. It does not. I mean, how many times you have to see famous people tell us that it does not bring them happiness, to learn that it really doesn't bring us happiness, you know? But Instagram, like, the way that we are engaging in world affairs tells us that we haven't yet really learned that lesson well enough. And I feel like some of the greatest joy I've experienced is to see how much struggle and difficulty and pain actually I can still experience in my position. That's a uniting experience. Absolutely. You know, like, that's like thank God I'm not content with worldly things. Thank God. That's a joy, you know, to know that truly, if all of us are not free, then none of us are free. I mean, that's a reality. Like, that is a reality. You know, when there are oppressed people in the world, then we know that those systems, even though they appear to serve some, they don't serve anybody. You know, and it's those very systems that are buckling right now. I love this last quote. God's wisdom is indeed inscrutable to us all, and it is no use pushing too far to discover that which shall always remain a mystery to our mind. I just want to, like, live in that, just curl up in that quote. Maybe we can go on to this last one, which is, I think, really exciting. And then, you know, if there are any questions that have been banging around, we can take those on. And then I think probably share with people, like, the whole point is bringing all of this into action, right? Let's think about how we can do that, because that's, yeah, we do have answers to those questions. Maybe I'll take this one. We've humbly titled this "Current State of the World." And these are not our own words, by the way. The source of the optimism we feel is a vision transcending the cessation of war and the creation of agencies of international cooperation. Permanent peace among nations is an essential stage, but not, Baha'u'llah asserts, the ultimate goal of the social development of humanity. Beyond the initial armistice forced upon the world by the fear of nuclear holocaust, beyond the political peace reluctantly entered into by suspicious rival nations, beyond pragmatic arrangements for security and coexistence, beyond even the many experiments in cooperation which these steps will make possible, lies the crowning goal: the unification of all the peoples of the world in one universal family. If I can just venture to my interpretation right now, is the difference between, you know, peace, which is just the absence of war, as it says, you know, this is transcending just the stopping of war. We're not even talking about the creation of agencies of international cooperation like the UN, you know. We're not even talking about peace among the nations. It's an essential part. But the ultimate goal of the development of humanity, this coming of age that we're in right now, is for us to unite as a family. You know, like, the difference of the specialness of bonds there, I think is very specific. Because, you know, you even see now that we're like, and by the way, this was written in 1985. This says, where does it say? Beyond the political peace reluctantly entered into by suspicious rival nations. I mean, we talked about this truce that is happening between some of the major powers of the world. I mean, that's what that is. It's reluctant and it's temporary, and we're still suspicious of each other, and we're rivals. You know, like, what do we think? That's peace? That's some weak peace. you know, and then even beyond these experiments in cooperation, which many of us are engaging in, you know, these are steps towards this crowning goal, which I think is inconceivable to all of us. That's the point, to unite as one family. I see a couple of questions popping up during that. Maybe, is there anything relevant? I can't.
I mean, it's not super relevant to, well, it might be, but to this slide, but definitely to the overall topic. So Matthew says, I'm curious about the idea Penn expressed that it's dangerous to think of COVID as a good thing. He also talked about the distinction between trials that are heaven sent versus trials that aren't. Are there any world events that aren't sanctioned by God? If so, is God unable to impact them or just unwilling? If God is able to prevent something bad from happening and chooses not to, isn't it a bit like sanctioning a bad thing? Isn't it possible that all things are God's sanctioned and that we just have a lousy perspective?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that last, I mean, he answered his own question. I mean, yeah. But the clarification though, but actually, I think it's like, it's being aware. When I said it's dangerous to think of COVID as a good thing, I think what I was trying to say is like, our lousy perspectives are what is dangerous. It's not, you know, like, I think it's pretty evident that religious authorities have throughout time abused their authority and said, oh, well, this is by God, when it's not, you know, they've done something for their power. So, you know, I guess like what I was trying to be sensitive to when I said that, that it would be dangerous to think of COVID as a good thing. I think it's like, we want to be careful because there are those of us who haven't yet really felt the impact as intimately as others. There are people who are dying, not just dying, they're dying alone. There are families who are racked, trying to feed themselves, their children, you know, there are people who are struggling in such an intense way right now. Are they going to have jobs? Are they going to be able to make money? Where does this state of things leave them if they've already been barely considered by you know, the world economy and our infrastructures, you know, like, so I guess when I say it's like, I wouldn't want to try and I think I've probably said enough, right? Like that's what I was trying to say. But what this friend was getting at, I think, was really true. Like, you know, certainly God is not powerless to stop these things. But I think in as much as the spread of COVID-19 is a result of human negligence, that is what we have to reconcile for ourselves. God is not, you know, like an overprotective parent who's just going to come in and stop. You know, we need to learn. You know, the best way to learn sometimes is through, well, yes, I'm stopping myself because I don't want to make a, you know, keep in mind, I'm also a public figure and I find myself trying to answer tough questions sometimes, and you can really get your feet held to the fire. So I'm trying to not make dangerous oversimplifications, if that makes any sense.
Someone who happens to be my husband sent in a question, and that question is, what helps you remember that trials happen for you and not to you, especially when you are in the midst of suffering?
Yeah, Bahá'í. It's like, that's an invocation from the Baha'i faith.
Yeah, like you gotta explain that one.
Yeah, that's Ya Bahá'í. Roughly translates to like, he is the glory of glories. It's hard to remember this. I mean, look, I and so many Baha'is I know, so many people actually, you know, regardless of how we identify, strive to live this way, right? Like with this perspective. And yet, sometimes like it's often the dumbest of challenges that you struggle with the most. Like, I mean, even now that we have to be home and we're just all cooking and cleaning constantly. Just cooking and cleaning constantly. And it's humbling, you know?
Just wait till you have a kid, Penn.
Oh,
It's gonna be constant.
Yeah.
Well, you do have a stepson, so you.
Right. So, but
Okay.
I wasn't with him for the first 5 years of his life. So it's that unique 0 to 5 that I'm just like, ooh. Ooh.
So I think maybe this is a good chance to tie in what we've been talking about with what you mentioned earlier, Jess, about the Institute process and what Baha'is are doing. Like, what are we supposed to do with all of this? There are efforts that Baha'is are putting in motion globally, and that can be found in every single country across the world, that have the intention of really getting at the fabric of society and changing that, rather than just like putting a band-aid over different symptoms. And so Baha'is often refer to them as the core activities, which just encompasses these different efforts. So some of them involve what we call devotionals, spaces for people of all walks of life, of all religious or non-religious backgrounds, to come together and connect through the sharing of different writings, prayers, poetry, like whatever speaks to the heart and to the soul. So Baha'is participate in devotionals. They also hold children's classes, which are spaces for children to come and develop these gems within them. This was actually a quote that was in one of the slides that we didn't really elaborate on too much. But they're spaces for children to learn about their inherent nobility and work on tuning into these inherent virtues that we all have, and how do we use these virtues to better humanity and to contribute to society. And then the other core activity is what we call study circles. And they are spaces that, again, are often hosted by Baha'is, but everything that I've just mentioned is open to everyone regardless. And there's no like expectation of like being a Baha'i or converting or anything like that. But within these study circles, people get together in smaller groups and study the Baha'i writings and how they dive into different aspects of the realities of life, whether it's life after death, your relationship with God, the history of the Baha'i faith. There's a multitude of different types of books that we could dive into. But all of it is designed at getting to the soul and the heart of the individual, and how are these gems that we all have intended to better the world? What is our role in bettering the world?
Nura, someone's asked, what do you mean when you say gems?
Virtues like compassion, love, kindness, patience, just virtues. I hope that answers it. Anything within us that will contribute to the welfare of those around us, the world around us, the people around us. And they're God-given traits, I guess.
There's something that Nura mentioned that I think is really key. She mentioned a phrase I liked, the fabric of society. And we're not just trying to put a Band-Aid on it. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if maybe we're not even trying to mend it, but we're adding to this rich tapestry, this entirely new framework. We, meaning all of humanity, we're at this stage right now where we're all together trying to understand the ways forward. So Baha'is are simply trying to add to this process. It's a process of community building, where people of all ages, all faiths, all backgrounds are engaging in this process of community building, which all revolves around the teachings of Baha'u'llah, which we believe are essentially unifying, and it's shown, I think, that that this is true in localities all around the world, in every corner of the globe. And so any of these activities ultimately are oriented around the science of love. If one of the essential principles of the faith is the harmony of science and religion, we're approaching in a very systematic manner how we engage in true friendship and deepen existing bonds of friendship. We must believe that every individual is able to see the world around them and participate in it and contribute to its betterment. Every single person has the potential to become a protagonist for change in their community. And if you think of this framework extended to the whole globe for every individual, then that means every individual is arising to the degree that they are interested and able, and they're taking responsibility for themselves and others, and it necessarily what we encourage is that this invitation is extended to all, regardless of any kind of identification, because we all have our role to play, and we all have to contribute the light of our soul, which is shining uniquely to the like, the infinite spectrum of light that is God's humanity, and so the way that these core activities manifest is sometimes very small and very humble, but it's essentially like that we're building bonds of true friendship, and that it's almost like, I like this exercise, like take on any of the world's problems and see if you can answer it with friendship. How do we solve world hunger? Might it be through friendship? How do we end war? Might it be through friendship? How do we end any given prejudice? Is it through friendship? How do we end, literally practically any problem? It's like, how do you treat your friends? How do we care for our friends? If we really see the world of people as being worthy of our friendship because of their humanity, not because of everybody's deserving or worth, but because everybody was created by God and that we are as imperfect as them. A practice that we strive, which I think you find this at the heart of every religion, is to ascribe not to another soul that which you would not have ascribed to yourself. That rather than looking at the faults of others, that we look at our own faults and work on those. That's the key to a healthy relationship 101. That's like the opposite of codependency. That's like what you strive for in a marriage or a good friendship. But if you extend that to the world, that's a world in peace and unity. And it's not idealistic. It's actually strange that we often cast aside these notions of peace and unity as like, immature. Oh, is war mature? Is the killing of people the most mature solution we have? We've tried it for thousands of years, I'm not sure what's so noble or mature about it, although we make great movies about it. We definitely do that.
I also think another way to think about it is people who are involved in this process are systematically trying to apply the teachings in the Baha'i faith to the ills of the world as a group of people. And they get together regularly to study the teachings and to say, okay, how do we apply it to this problem? Now let's go do it. Let's make a plan. Let's go do it. And 3 months later, let's get back together. We reflect on how did it go? What did we learn? What can we do differently? Was it not effective? How was it effective? Now let's make another plan based on what we learned. Go out and do it. Now let's come back 3 months later and reflect again. So you've got a large group of people in every single country in the world doing this right now. And we are just looking for more people who want to be involved, who want to figure out how these teachings help to address the problems of the world today. You know, Baha'u'llah said that the peace of the world was unattainable unless its unity was firmly established. And so we understand that unity has to be addressed first. That is the operating principle around which everything that we do revolves around. So that's another way of thinking of it as well. Nura, I just got really distracted by whoever is in that room with you.
I was texting my roommates and I was like, can somebody please turn the lights on? It's really dark. So one turned them on and then the other turned them off, thinking that they were like, just.
I was like, I was on a roll.
Sorry.
You're fine. Okay, so real quick, I know we're getting pretty late. There are a few people who did ask, how can they join the Baha'i faith? Not that that's our intention, but we do want to answer these questions.
Sure. Well, so first you have to wait for the next full moon, and then I'm just kidding.
Tell them about the sacrifice.
Right, exactly.
One sacrifice. It's a very informal process, really. When somebody decides that they believe in Baha'u'llah and in the principles of the Baha'i faith, there's a registration card that you fill out just purely for administrative purposes, and then you get plugged into your local community. So,
well, can I also just say too, like, how does anyone become a Baha'i? Every day we declare, every day we strive to live by these principles. You know, we can't estimate anybody's relationship in their soul to God. And so the essential process of becoming a Baha'i is one we all engage in every day, which is reading the writings of Baha'u'llah. Yes. That is something that is just the inimitable core to the process. I mean, yes, of course, there are practical things. You know, you can fill out a card, and you become aware of the administrative order of the Baha'i faith, which is, by the way, an essential dimension to this that is often hard to explain unless you go into detail unto itself. But like, it's a beautiful, necessary part of this. It's the very practical way we live this out. You know, it's the way that we walk the mystical path with practical feet. You know, and what it does is you're able to become friends with a worldwide community. I mean, I've gone to places in the world that I've never been, and I find the Baha'is, and I have a place to sleep, or I have friends to go to lunch with. You know, it's really amazing. But the first most essential part of the process is to develop your relationship to Baha'u'llah, and to read those morning and night, and to pray and meditate. You know, these are like, I get nervous when we get caught up in the name Baha'i and like how we identify, because
okay, but I'm gonna jump.
Yes, but you should also understand that the necessary practical steps towards it. Like, there are numbers you can call, there are places you can go, there are people you can meet, and you should do those things.
Yes.
So there is the process of becoming a Baha'i. So this is my meat and potatoes brain. Penn's souffle brain just like took over, but I'm gonna bring my meat and potatoes brain in for a second, because everything Penn is saying is absolutely right, and it's all true. In my head, I file that as what it means to be a Baha'i. But in order to, like, if somebody is asking, how does one formally become a Baha'i? The more administrative process is the declaration process, or like signing a card. That's all it is. There's no like ritual around it. It's just to become connected with the roles. Now, to live a Baha'i life and to be a Baha'i life is to strive to have a Baha'i life is exactly what Penn was saying. But I want to be very clear that there is a very informal yet necessary process to be technically considered a Baha'i. And then on top of that, which embodies ultimately believing in Baha'u'llah and that he is the prophet founder for today.
And people want to know if to be a Baha'i, they have to give up being, for example, Catholic.
So
No,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that it's a fulfillment and a magnification of all the faiths of the world in that sense. You know, in accepting Baha'u'llah, you must accept Jesus,
right.
You know, and Moses and Muhammad, and Buddha and Krishna. So the first principle of the faith is independent investigation. So it's like this relationship between Baha'u'llah and Jesus as a Catholic will be very interesting to you, and you should study that and investigate the nature of that relationship. And I think that would be really fruitful, you know.
But it is, being a Baha'i is an identity in and of itself. But one cannot be a Baha'i, like Penn is saying, one cannot be a Baha'i without simultaneously accepting the divinity of Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, Krishna, etc. But to be clear, it's not kind of like the Unitarian Church where you can be like this thing and this thing. Like being a Baha'i is its own religious identity. But like my father, who grew up in the Mormon faith, in the Church of Latter-day Saints, he often talks about how his love for Christ just magnified exponentially when he became a Baha'i, because of the lens through which Baha'u'llah would speak about Christ and Christianity and the beauty of that faith. So again, you cannot be a Baha'i without, it's a package deal, but being a Baha'i is its own identity uniquely in and of itself.
And that is because, no, go ahead, Jess, yeah.
No, go ahead, Ben, please.
I was going to say that is because Baha'u'llah is the manifestation for this day. Right. This message is for now. There will be others after him, as there have been before. Right. But to believe in Baha'u'llah is to believe in Jesus and all the prophets of God.
So we've got some people, so sweet. McKenna says, ugh, I wish I could get coffee with you guys or something and have long talks like this in person.
Oh, McKenna,
I know. So McKenna, if you live in the Maine, New Hampshire area, you can email us, not Penn and Nura, but you can follow them on Facebook or Instagram, whatever. But you can email greenacre@usbnc.org. So greenacre@usbnc.org. If you guys don't live in this area and you want to talk to Baha'is about stuff like this, you just call 1-800-22-UNITE. 1-800-22-UNITE. And by calling that number, you will be able to get in touch with Baha'is in your area if you want to have more conversations like this. Go ahead, Nura.
Sorry. You could also go to Baha'i.org. So
Baha'i.org is a great resource.
Yeah.
It's a deep resource. Also, all of the Baha'i writings are available there for free. And you can connect to anybody through there. You know, it's all there for the taking. Definitely.
And Lauren, it's absolutely okay to learn about the Baha'i faith just to educate yourself. You do not have to become a Baha'i.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other questions, Jess, that you think would be really important for us to speak on really quickly?
Well, several people had relationship questions, so they should.
Actually, why don't we tell them about because I'm going to be talking, right?
Yes.
Plug that because that's your thing.
That's right. So Nura actually will be back on Greenacre online programming. When did we set that for? The 20, oh gosh. I don't have it in front of me. I don't remember.
It's next weekend, the 25th.
Yeah, the 25th.
Same time.
So in order to, 8 p.m. Eastern time, a week from today, Nura will be back talking about basically how to have healthy relationships, especially during lockdown. And so in order to find out how to watch that, you can go to Green Acre's website, which is greenacre.news. And then go to the events, click on events. It's not currently up there, but it will be ASAP. Or you can just come back to this YouTube channel in a week and it will be streaming live.
I'll talk about it on my Instagram too, as it gets closer.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we can funnel the relationship questions over there.
Yes. And there's so many good questions. I also recognize that it's after 10. I'm okay to keep going, but I want to be respectful of your time as well, you guys.
Yeah, let's take like, let's take one or two more. And
okay, let me take a look here. How this person's first language, I don't think is English. They're doing a great job at trying, so I'm just going to read it verbatim and maybe you can figure out how is for someone to process or to give advice for those who suffer domestic violence, taking into account the Baha'i religion.
One more time.
I think what they're asking is basically, how do you talk to people who are really suffering, like for example, from domestic violence, about the Baha'i perspective on tests and difficulties, probably without sounding like a jerk.
Oh.
That's what I think she's saying.
Yeah, well, is she saying we didn't do it now? Yeah, no. I mean, look, this is, no, I'm kidding. I think this is a great question. And, the best is done one-on-one in friendship. I don't think you could ever share the teachings of Baha'u'llah and anybody would ever become Baha'i, without it being through, true relationships. Even if it's instantaneous and, something of the truth of the message comes through in that moment. I think this is what we've been trying to do all night, which is dance around the exciting and difficult truth that there are tests and difficulties in the world, and that a God who is all loving is also a fact of reality. It's I think what the entire world is struggling with in our functionally atheistic society. Like, we have been grappling for centuries now with this idea that there can be war, that there can be murder, that there can be abuse, great abuse, manipulation, oppression, and yet God is a reality. How do we reconcile these things? And it's a question that is important to everybody. I think, as I say, I think we've been trying to do that tonight.
It's impossible to give a blanket answer to a question that complicated, because we can't give a blanket answer to any test that anybody is going through. So yeah, it absolutely goes back to what Penn is talking about in terms of friendship and connection, and going deep with the individual who's going through the struggle that they're going through, and remembering that it's not about like, oh, tests and difficulties are just, they build character, endure. That is definitely not the idea behind what we're talking about, but rather the potential growth and beauty that can come from some of the struggles that we go through. But it's impossible to address a question that heavy. It's impossible to give it the justice that it deserves, because it's layered with a lot of other things that also need to be addressed within the entire system of what we're talking about. So it's a beautiful question, but it's almost impossible to do it justice in this space in a few seconds.
Mm-hmm. So I'm super curious to see what's on the last slide.
It's just a continuation of this quote, actually.
It's a great way to end, actually.
Okay. Let's take a look. And I'm sorry, but this fits in perfectly also with there was one more question I was thinking about putting to you guys, and this person says, do all of these world calamities occur because we as humanity need to become united in order for them to end?
Wait, can you say that one more time?
Do all these world calamities occur because we as humanity need to become united in order for them to end?
I mean, low key, I think so, but I mean, it's like, that's trying to answer that question with confidence is to say, God's inscrutable will with confidence. And, no one can say that without a delusion or two. So, but it certainly seems as though even if these world calamities are a result of human negligence, they still have the capacity to transform us,
I low-key think so too.
Yeah. Well, why don't we, maybe Nura, do you want to read one and I'll read the other?
Sure. Disunity is a danger that the nations and peoples of the earth can no longer endure. The consequences are too terrible to contemplate, too obvious to require any demonstration.
The well-being of mankind, Baha'u'llah wrote more than a century ago. Its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established.
Which I think directly answers the question that you just asked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So do we need to, I think for anybody whose heart is affected by these words, whose mind is stimulated by the discussion, don't let it end here. Yeah. There are resources and there are Baha'is near you. They're hiding everywhere, like Harry Potter. It's
like what?
Harry Potter.
Yeah. Hiding in plain sight. Trying to do the work, that's how I found them. But yeah, you can go to Baha'i.org. That's BAHAI.org. You can call 1-800-22-UNITE. Of course, that's in America. But they're nearby, and there's a way to get in touch with them no matter where you are. So are there any other resources we should mention?
There are different, like you could follow Baha'is on Instagram. But yeah, I would say Baha'i.org is the best. In fact, Penn and I even got some of our content from Baha'i.org. We just were like, that's a great paragraph. And we just included it. So Baha'i.org is the only, it's one of the few websites that's actually under the auspice of the national administrative body of the Baha'is. So it's the most.
So it's international.
Yeah, it's actually, yes, it's international. So it can connect you with Baha'is anywhere you are. So I would very much recommend that as like the first stopping point. Yeah. There are a lot of other resources and I see people offering other suggestions, but Baha'i.org is the one that is like actually representative of the international Baha'i community. So I would stick with that.
Yeah, and if you want to check out the United States, the US Baha'i website is Baha'i.us, which is pretty good too.
It's good.
It's all right. It's really good. All right.
There are two things. I see a fan of mine named Miranda who's watching, and I just want to say hello to Miranda. How you doing? Thank you for joining. And then also a friend asks, is there karma or good and evil from the Baha'i faith? This is something where I think the resource Baha'i.org is a great one, because although we can't spend the time now, I think there's a lot there. But I would really encourage you to look that up in whatever language is your first. By the way, from your name, I'm not sure, and so but there are a lot of superstitious ideas that I think we all have without guidance, and that some of the essential guidance around these concepts of good and evil are really useful. So if you can just go. You know what I mean? It's just that question was just so pressing, and I'm just like, Should I just try and answer it really fast?
Go for it.
No.
If they want to log off,
yeah, totally. Yeah, I'll just be really quick. Evil is not a positively, actually we did go over this earlier, but evil is not a positively existing force. It is the same as darkness in that it is only the absence of light. It is the absence of good. The way that we identify a negative quality is through a positive attribute. We wouldn't know what hunger is without the feeling of a full stomach. We wouldn't know what poverty is without inherent wealth. We wouldn't know what sickness is without health. These are some simplifications, but it's at least an example of how we only know of a lack of something if it positively exists. So evil is very much the same, although it's a very powerful and seductive notion. It has no positive existence, which is to say that all of existence is degrees of positivity, which is very different from the conceptions of good and evil that I think a lot of people have, whether they subscribe to a religion or not. It suggests that once we do away with a lot of our superstitious ideas and sort of limiting ideas about the human being, it's just like endless progress, a different kind of progress, not only material, but spiritual, which is, so this is the reason I wanted to answer that question, is because I think it is sort of a core concept that is very limiting for us all, these superstitious ideas we have about evil forces. So yeah, but there's a lot of literature on Baha'i.org or other resources, for that. So keep reading and keep searching for yourself, please.
All right.
That's great.
Yeah. Is that good?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good now.
Okay. Nice.
It had to come out.
Wait a second.
Please, let me get it out.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We hope to continue to bring great, interesting, inspiring, hopefully empowering programming like this that helps us all make this world a bit better.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Penn. Thank you, Nura, so much. This was great. People they're like, this is so great. I'm learning so much. I love this. You guys are great.
Oh,
there's a lot of love pouring in right now. I will say also, you guys are like the audience, not a single nasty comment, not one. I'm very
only
impressed.
by the grace of God.
That's right. Good job, everybody.
Well, I'm so glad we had such a patient and loving group. Lauren has been like our biggest fan.
We are here to support.
She sent like 15 messages. We love you, Lauren. Lauren, where do you live? Georgia.
Yeah. McKenna really wants a shout out.
Okay.
Like,
well, he wants it from Penn. So
does that just mean I say the word McKenna? Hey, McKenna.
McKenna, look.
I said the word. Thank you really for all of you for tuning in. Lauren, Sherry, seeing names here.
No,
Nura's like, oh God, you're gonna have to say them all now. Cassie.
We're going down the rabbit hole now. Okay.
Yeah. Deshmek.
Really?
Netta.
McKenna was like, yes.
Rachmini.
All right, everybody.
All right, bye.
Have a good night,
Thank you guys
everyone.
for tuning in.
Thank you.
How do I get out of this?
Wait.
Oh, here we go. We're leaving now, right?
Yeah, we're leaving. I'm trying to figure out if I can
Are we
Press
all
the button, leave. All right, I'm out. Peace, y'all.
Bye. Good night.